Bonjour. Okay, nobody is very wake up, so we are going to talk about speech today. So the first session will be about speech segmentation, and the second session will be about speaker diarization. Unfortunately, my colleague Hervé Brodin will not be here physically because he had some troubles to take his train. So he will be doing his talk remotely from Toulouse. So just a brief introduction. So my PhD was about emotion recognition at LIMSI, so now it's called Listen. I have done 2 years of musical acoustics on not speech but on flute. Then I was working on expressive speech synthesis in Brittany, so another country, not far away. And I'm here in Le Mans since 2017 as an assistant professor, and I'm working in the language speech technology team that is welcoming the JSALT this year. So today we will end with a tutorial on Pianot audio. So this will be for this afternoon. So in the end of the day, you will be experts of speech segmentation. So we talked a lot about text during the previous week. So now we are moving a little bit to speech, and what is different from speech. What is different in speech in comparison to text. So here I put some examples, written examples. One is from an audiobook, so the text is the following, but the little pigs grew too big, we want homes of our own, they said. So if we say it like that, you're sure you don't understand anything. And if we listen to that, there's no sound.
Homes of our own, they said.
So I do it again.
But the little pigs grew too big. We want homes of our own, they said.
So, according to you, what is missing in the written text? Yeah, we need the punctuation, and what the punctuation will help us to say correctly the speech. All right, we will see it in the presentation. Then we will have a political debate. So, sorry, it is in French. Ce que disait Léna Pasca, c'est quelque chose qui, voilà déjà des associations, noyauté, peu si je peux finir. So it's not understandable like that.
Ce que dit Léna Pasca, c'est quelque chose qui
voilà déjà
une association cornaquée noyautée.
Si je peux finir.
Allez.
So here we have a TV political debate, and there are 3 speakers, and of course they are talking together because they don't want to listen to the others. So this information is also contained in speech. And then we have a friend conversation between 2 friends. I can read it. Non, c'est pas love story, c'est que je sais pas, j'avoue, ça fait penser à un confessionnal, oui. I tried to translate, to make the transcription, but in reality it's not exactly that.
Moi, j'avoue que ça fait penser un peu, tu sais, au confessionnal et tout. Oui.
So here we have a lot of things that are not only linguistic information. We have some loss, we have some breathing, and so on. And 2 speakers, the 2 friends, are talking also together. So that's what kind of material that we are dealing with. So there is not only the linguistic information, there is much more. And we are going to see how we can process this kind of thing. So I will start with the basics of voice acoustics, so how we pronounce the sound, how we do some sounds with our voice. So everyone probably knows that we have a vocal tract. The vocal tract starts with the lungs, so we expire air from the lungs, and it goes to the pharynx through the vocal folds. And then the sound is modulated by the articulator, so the tongue, the teeth, the vocal cavity, and the nasal cavity. So how it works in practice, we have the vocal folds that will open and close according to the breath, the flow of air that is going through these vocal folds. And we have, in fact, a periodic flow that is going in the tube, that is the pharynx. So here, we have an airflow, and this airflow is made of different short breathing that are going in vibration in this tube. So it's completely fluid mechanics. And because it is a periodic sound, so there is a force that will open and close the vocal folds at a periodic frequency. So we have here the vocal flow, and we have then an harmonic signal. And this harmonic signal will be called as the source in the source filter model. And we have something that is very important for speech. It's called the fundamental frequency. In fact, it's the frequency of opening and closing the vocal folds. There are different ways to open and close. Blah. Okay. There are different ways to open and close the vocal folds. At least there are two different mechanisms. One is the chest mechanism, so we want to have a low and powerful voice. And here, so the image is not correct because I changed the windows. So here, in fact, the chest vibratory mechanism, the vocal folds are in 3D, and they will be vibrating very slowly. In the M2 mechanism, so we don't see anything, sorry, there is a high F0 because the vocal folds are tense, and they will be able to vibrate more quickly. And we can see on the image here, so this is for singers. So singers, this is low frequency, and then we go to high frequency. And here in the y-axis, you have the intensity of the signal that is emitted by the singer. And we can see the M1 vibration mechanism, so the chest mode, and the M2 mode. If we want to have a low F0, we will prefer to have the M1 mode. And if we want to have a high F0, we will prefer to have the M2 mode. So singers are quite used to. Speakers are not conscious of these mechanisms. And if you want to cry, not to cry, but to have a very high F0 sound, then you will have another mechanism that is a kind of whistle, and it is not these two mechanisms that we are using for speech. So if we go back to the source filter model, so we have the vocal folds that are vibrating, opening and closing. We have the airflow that is periodic, and then this airflow will go through the vocal tract. So the vocal tract, we can model it with different approaches. The first approach is to see the profile of the humans. So we can see that for each vowel, we have a different profile. You can try. If you do an I or an A or something else, so you will move your articulator in order to make the appropriate sound. And we can also modelize it with the tubes, because in fact a resonator, the vocal cavity can be modeled as a tube. And this kind of tube that is open, closed, so open here and close here, is in fact a A or A in French. And if you want more details, you can model the profile more accurately. But in fact, acousticians are able to reproduce the sounds with different profiles like that. And then we apply these profiles to the input airflow, and we have the output pressure that we are doing with our voice. So this is mainly the source filter model, so maybe a lot of you already know. The resonance of the resonator are modulated by lips, tongues, teeth, nasal and buccal cavities, and maybe other sounds in other languages that I don't know very well. And we usually use in speech processing only the formants information. So we will use only the resonance of this vocal tract from F1 to F4, and generally we reduce it to F1 and F2 only. So this complex modelization when we go to speech processing, in fact, we reduce it to two information, F1 and F2. And it seems that is okay. It is okay to understand what we are saying. What is interesting also to say is that the source filter model, that is the basics of voice acoustics, is quite different from other sounds produced by, for example, trumpet or other kind of instruments that are almost similar. In fact, in speech, source and filter are decorrelated. So we can tune the F0, we can tune the vibration of the vocal tract, we can give a command of F0, and we can also give a command of formants. So we can have the same pitch, but with different formants. If you play trumpets, for example, it's not possible. In trumpets, the source is not vocal fold, it is lips that are vibrating. The filter is not the vocal cavity, but the trumpet. And you know that the trumpet, you will have fingerings to tune the length of the tube. And in fact, with this instrument, the fingerings impose the lip vibration. So the source and the filter are correlated. In speech, it is not the case. So we have this chance to not have a given F0 for a given voyelle. So this is mainly the way we pronounce the vowels. So the source filter model is a model for harmonic sounds. So we can model all the vowels of the languages. But of course, speech is not only vowels. So we need other models. I will not go into details of the other models because they are more complicated. But for example, we have the fricatives. If I go to the International Phonetic Alphabet, so the IPA, here we have a green line with all the fricatives phonemes, so f, sh, s, etc. So they are stationary sounds, but they are made with a turbulent flow in a constriction with or without vocal fold vibration. So if you do sh, there is no vibration, so it's not an harmonic sound. But if you do j, yes, the vocal folds are vibrating. We have also a different way of doing sounds. It's plosives. So here we stop the sound and we open we open a constriction suddenly in order to make a sound. So it is like when you clap your hand or when you say a p, because in the p, for example, the lips are closed and there is a pressure behind the lips and then it opens to produce the sound. Of course, we cannot model that kind of sound with a source filter model. And the plosives, you have them in the red part. So in French, we have the p and b. So one is voiced, one is devoiced. And in other languages, you have many more plosives that I cannot pronounce. So if we are going to the speech processing, what is important for us? So I say that we have the F0 and the formant information. But in fact, it's not enough because we want to modelize other vowels, other sounds than just vowels. So we have to get the spectral information and the time information. So in the example here, so we can see quite clearly the harmonic parts of the sound. So it corresponds to the source filter model, mainly, F0 and formants. But we have sounds such as this one, for example, where this harmonic model doesn't fit at all. So here we can see that we have some high energy in the high frequencies, and this is a fricative sound. So we have to get the frequency information in order to find this sound. And we can see that this one is different from this one, where I think it is a plosive because we have silence before and a sudden sound. So that's why we are using mainly the spectrogram information. So I will not go into detail of how we get this spectrogram because you probably know Fourier transform and so on. But just remind the fact that this representation has been set up in order to find the frequency content of the speech sounds. But we need also the time information. For example, plosive, we absolutely need the time information to detect this kind of sound. Also, you have to remind that this is one part of the spectrogram we have, because the Fourier transform is a complex number, and then we keep only the amplitude and we discard the phase. So I don't know if you are working with phase, but for sure nobody is using that. So the spectrogram is one of the best ways to retrieve the phonetic information from the speech signal. But we have other information that is not only speech sounds. So I will go to prosodic information. When we listen to the audiobook example at first, you said that there was missing the punctuation. So the punctuation here for the three little pigs is very important in order to group, in fact, the speech sounds. So here we have, if we get the punctuation and high case, you have but a little pigs grew too big. We want homes of our own, they said. And if we go to the spectrogram of the speech signal, you can see that there is a first group corresponding to the first sentence, then a silence, then a second group corresponding to what is said by the pigs, then they said, and then the bells to turn the page. So if we want to understand better the speech signal, of course, we will not need only the speech sounds. If we have the sequence of phoneme, we will miss a lot of things. So we will need to have the groups of phonemes. We need the silence, the pauses. So here we have a silence and pauses and then a breathing. And here we also have a silence and then silence and the bell. So rhythm is very important for speech, to understand speech when you have more than one sentence. Rhythm is usually defined as the way of grouping units, and for speech units are in fact phonetic units usually. We also need intonation. So here in blue, I've plotted the F0 curve. So you have the F0 curve for all the groups, and F0 of course can be retrieved on the bell ring also. And according to you, what is the main difference? What is the main difference between the first and the second group regarding the F0? I don't want you to sleep. We can listen to the sample.
But the little pigs grew too big. We want homes of our own, they said.
So yeah, okay. So here, in fact, the speaker, the reader, will have an expressive intonation that is very strong because she is saying what the pigs are supposed to say. So we can imagine that this important variation of F0 can be in fact noticed or marked as the, I don't know the word in English, but the sort of brackets we have here to say that it is a person, a character saying something. And then we go back to the normal F0 of the narrator. So this information or F0 variation, it will be important to understand the semantic content, but not within the sentence, but in between the sentence themselves. Of course, the intensity is important also. We have the intensity in yellow, and usually it is following the F0 contour. So we have said that the speech is not only phones, not only vowels, fricatives, and plosives, but also prosodic information. So prosody is usually defined as the F0 contour, the intensity, and the rhythm. So we have this information of F0 contour and intensity that is very important for stressed languages. For example, in English, if you don't have the stress information, the F0 on some vowels, you will miss some words. Also in tonal language, of course, the F0 contour is very important in order to disentangle some words. And usually in prosody, we also include the voice quality. So, because when you will say a sentence with a voice quality or another, probably it will express something that is different. And we can hear here two different sounds from almost all people that were recorded in French. So the first is a happy female of 65 years old.
Non, mais...
So of course we can say that it's a male. And here we have a sad male of 79 years old.
Ce que vous me demandez là, je le vis.
Okay, so it's very difficult to understand what is saying by this person. So here we have different voice quality, and this will be embedded in the speech signal also. So we need Prosodic to group the speech units and to segmentate the speech. And we also need Prosodic to interpret the expressive information. Is it a narrator or is it a character speaking? So we need this information also. And the last point regarding voice acoustics, so I'm going at different levels, and we are going in the last level. So here we have the friend conversation, so I can put it again.
Moi, Ah, j'avoue que ça fait penser un peu, tu sais, au confessionnal et tout.
Okay, there are some holes in the sound. So here we have a friend conversation. They are talking completely spontaneously. So we have some loss. The two speakers are laughing together here, and they are also speaking while laughing. Here we have some parts that are overlapping. And we have also very important disfluences. That means that we have hesitant speech. So the speaker will start saying something, then stop, then repair, then modify what he wanted to say. So we call it repetitions, revisions, and false starts. We have also discourse markers. For example, so loth can be a marker, but also here we have a. Trop is not a very good word to say here. It's such as I mean, for example, in English. And this is completely due to this conversational spontaneous speech. And we have some interruption. So in this example, we don't have any, but in political debates, of course, we have a lot. So one speaker would like to take the floor to another. And this is not real clean speech. We have not clean sentences with the beginning and the end. Probably we don't know where is the end. And we can have different speakers talking together. And now we have to deal with that kind of material to do speech segmentation. Just a word also of the impact of affects on voice production. So we know that when we have an emotion, for example, we are happy or fear or angry, we will speak differently. For example, I will speak differently from here in the room than if I were at your place. And emotion has a very important impact on different aspects of voice production. For example, the breathing will be very strongly impacted by the emotion of the speaker. Also phonation and articulation. For example, in a pleasant situation, we will have a relaxed vocal tract, so the vocal folds will be relaxed. So we will probably more use the M1 vibration mode, so the chest mode, to have a lower frequency and quite a high energy. In an unpleasant situation, the vocal tract will be tense, and then we will have vocal folds that will vibrate more quickly, and we will be more likely to have the M2 mode, so the head mode, with a higher F0. So the people working on affective computing usually represent the emotion with two dimensions. So here we have the red dimension, which is the valence, pleasant or unpleasant, and the blue dimension with it, which is passive, active, or aroused or calm. So for example, if you're a bit sleepy, you will be completely passive and without any valence to 0. If you're happy to be here, maybe you will be more active, you will ask some question, and you are likely to be at the right side of the valence axis. According to the emotion, you will have different F0, different energy, and your vocal tract and vocal folds will vibrate differently. In case of a very high level of fear, you will have a vocal tract very tense, and then you will use the whistle mode in order to shout very loudly with a very high F0. So there is an axis that I didn't present here, but we can consider it also. When we have some communication situation, we will include also the control dimension. For example, if you are in a professional situation, you will have a lot of control of yourself and a lot of control of your voice production. If you're with friends, you don't mind if your articulation is not correct and so on. So it will impact also the control of the acoustic production. So, for example, with spontaneous speech, the linguistic content will be modified. So my examples are mainly in French, but that will help to understand better my colleagues and me. If you are talking spontaneously in French, you will elude some words. So you will remove, for example, all the negation. So you know that in French, we have two negation. You say, je ne sais pas, so we have the ne and the pas to say the negation. And when we talk spontaneously, usually we remove this ne, and we say only je sais pas. We have also the voicing and devoicing phenomenon. For example, when we pronounce McDo, so normally the C, you have to pronounce it K, but because the D after is a voiced consonant, then the C will be voiced. You will voice the C, so you will not pronounce it like McDo, but McDo. You have the same phenomenon in the other sense, for example, with absent in French. It's very difficult to say the B than the S, because the B is voiced and the S is devoiced. So you will transform the B as a P, and you will say absent. You will also, so this is also mainly for French, but we have some E that we do not pronounce, or we can remove in French. There are a lot of, it depends on the accent, the regional accent of the people. But here, for example, in je sais pas, the E here is a schwa, so you can remove it when talking. And then you say, je sais pas, but as je is voiced and is devoiced, you will say, je sais pas. So if you hear someone saying je sais pas, now you know that it comes from je ne sais pas, but it's very much longer. So now I have a question for you. According to you, what is this sound? What can it be? Well, it's not a harmonic. It is not noise. It depends what you call noise. Breathing? No, it's laughing. It's a kid that is laughing. I don't have the sound for this example, but it's a kid laughing, but without voicing, because when you laugh, you can say ha ha ha. So this is the classic voice that you have in the cinema. But when you're in a normal situation, you will not say that. You will do what you have done before, and there is no voicing here. So it's a laugh, but without voice. So if you remove this kind of signal, so it will not impact the speech transcription, because there is no phonetic information in it, there is no linguistic content. But if you want to do some social processing, social signal processing or affective computing, you will need this sound because it is really informative. But it doesn't fit with the source filter model and the phonetic information. So there are some people working on affect burst. So affect burst is usually defined as very brief, discrete, nonverbal expressions of affect in both face and voice, but we use only voice, as triggered by clearly identifiable events. So this is clearly identifiable, so not on the spectrogram, of course. And among these affect bursts, we have the loss, interjections, breathing, throat cleaning, and other mouth noise. So the question is, okay, is it noise or is it speech? Do we have to consider it? It depends of the application that you have after. But this is a very interesting question because usually the toolkits are designed for mainstream applications such as automatic speech recognition or speaker recognition, and we don't mind this information. So the traditional toolkits will not be really adapted for affective computing, for example. So this is a real question. After all, what is speech? What do we consider as speech? Is it all the sounds that the human can produce? Is it only linguistic content, so phone, phonemes, and words, sentence, semantic meaning? So this is very important. This is the content of the speech. But we have also speaker characteristics. So my colleague Hervé will talk about speaker recognition and speaker diarization. So here we need maybe the speaker ID, the regional accent, what age, gender, or eventually pathology of the people. Speech convey also in paralinguistic content. So we talked about prosody and voice quality. We talked about affect bursts, emotions, and control. We have also disfluences and hesitant speech. And if we look at a larger level, we have the communication skill. So we can have the role of the speaker. Is the speaker a journalist, an interviewee? Is it dominant in front of the other? We have overlapping speech and interruptions. So according to the application you would like to build, or the model you want to, the task you want to address, you will have to represent your speech in a different manner. So now just what are the machine-like speech representations we can use for speech processing? So I will not detail what is a spectrogram because I think most of you use this spectrogram, but I will go in details of the different parameters that we are using as default parameters in this spectrogram. So how do we hear? This is one of the first points because machine-like representations simulate the human ear. So this is an image, so you have the frequency on the x-axis and the intensity on the y-axis. So here you have pain. Don't make sounds with more intensity. If you do, you will lose your ear. And here you don't hear, you don't have any sound. You cannot hear. You have different ranges of the sounds. So you have the vocal range, then orchestral range, and the auditory experience in gray. So all the sounds that we can hear are in this gray triangle. So if you look more into details, we can see that our perception is log with frequency. So it's a logarithmic phenomenon. You can see also that here is performance, so we can hear sounds of less than 20 dB from 110 to 12 kHz. We can see also that the vocal range is from 100 to 10K, so almost here. And we know that the performance from F1 to F4 are less than 4,000 Hertz. So why do you use usually the 16 Hertz frequency rates? It comes from this information, because we can see here that the formant does not more than 4,000 Hertz is not necessary to understand, to distinguish, for example, A from an I. So maybe a sample rate at 8 kilohertz is enough. That is what we have with the telephone, for example. So when we do some speech processing, usually we go up to 16 kilohertz. So in order to have the spectral characteristics of the speaker voice. But so far for linguistic information, 8 is enough. So when we move to 22 kilohertz, for example, in speech synthesis, there is no reason from the acoustic here. The reason is mainly because it is a factor 2 from the CD information. So here we have the sampling frequency at 16 kilohertz, and the objective is to get the phonetic information, mainly if we are doing some speech transcription. So the maximum frequency we will have is 8,000 hertz, and we usually use a frame of 32 milliseconds. So 32 milliseconds is the approximate length of a phoneme. So of course, if you are doing a plosive, it can be shorter. But when you look to the average duration of a phoneme, 32 is a good fit. And usually the parameters are well done, because if you use the 512 points for your FFT, then if you have 512, so the frame will be with 512 samples, it corresponds to 32 milliseconds, so it is quite nice. But this is nice for speech processing. If you move to music information, of course, you have to change these parameters because they are not suitable for the music information. So the basic is the short time Fourier transform. So we have the spectrogram. Here we have discarded the phase information. Some people try to get back this phase information, especially for speech synthesis. But one of the problems is that we have a very high dimension. So if you use 512, where you have 512 samples here, and the information is uncompressed and redundant. So some of the bands here are quite redundant. And one of the problems also is that the frequency resolution is a constant of frequency. So if we go at low frequency or high frequency, in fact, the frequency resolution will be always the same. So one option to address the problem is that our hearing perception is not constant with the frequency. It is logarithmic. So one option is to use the MEL approach. So we have a perceptive MEL scale that is given by this equation. So according to the authors, we have different values here. It depends on which experiments you are based on. So you set up this perceptive MEL scale, and then you can build some triangular filters. We usually use, so it's default parameters, but we usually use 128 bands from 20 to 8 kilohertz. So it is not needed to go from 0 to 8, because between 0 and 20 we don't hear anything. There is no need to have a very large band in this frequency range. So here we have we have the MEL spectrogram, so we don't have 512 samples, but only 128. They are less decorrelated, but still they are. And here the advantage is also that the frequency resolution varies with F, because this MEL scale will change the resolution according to the frequency. So is it okay for you? MEL spectrogram is okay? You're all using that kind of representation? Okay, great. So there is another option to decorrelate the information in the y-axis. It is to use the MEL capsule coefficient. So you are using the MEL filter banks. So the process is the same, perceptive MEL scale and triangular filters. Then you take the log energy per filter, and you go back almost in the temporal domain with a discrete cosine transform. And then you can set up a number of coefficients that you want to have. You can set up, for example, 20 coefficients. So you have 128 MEL bands, but you can set up only 20 coefficients. So I don't remember how many I have here, but I think it is 20. And we usually say that the coefficients are better decorrelated than with a spectrogram. So it is almost true because of this transformation. We have to go back to the temporal domain, almost temporal. But the problem is that with this information, we have a frame information. So we usually add the temporal evolution with delta, so derivative and second derivative. We know also that the MFCC0 is proportional to the energy of the signal. So we can also add the log energy information, but it is redundant with the MFCC0. So you can remove this blue line and replace it by the log energy. So this is mainly what machine learning people are using, the MFCCs or the MEL spectrogram information. But with that, you have only part of the information, or it is not really adapted for some tasks. For example, if you want to do some emotion recognition, the spectrogram will convey all the information, but maybe we will need to have more the temporal evolution than the frame time frequency information. So here, if you look to the papers on emotion recognition or affective computing, you usually have some low-level features. So here it was in Interspeech 2009, so the first attempt to have a unified setup. You have the zero crossing rate, the energy, F0, harmonic to noise ratio, and MFCC also. So we can see that the prosodic information, so mainly the F0 and energy, so we don't have the rhythm here, are computed by this approach. And there are, to these low-level features, we can apply some statistical functionals, such as the mean, standard deviation, kurtosis, skewness, and so on, in order to describe the temporal evolution on a segment. So now that we have built some sequence-to-sequence model, of course we don't use anymore this kind of representation, but so far to explain and to interpret, I think it is worthy to know that it exists. There were another attempt to unify the acoustic parameters for affective computing. So it is called GMAPS. Maybe some of you already know that. We have regarding the different version you use, but you have 88 features that are coming from low-level F0, energy, and so on information. So now we move to speech segmentation. So we say that we have some voice acoustics that define some parameters, some descriptors, and then we have some machine-like representation, mainly the MEL spectrogram and prosodic information. And then how can we segmentate the speech? So what does it mean, segmentation? It means that we have to find time boundaries in the speech signal. So for example, we can wonder, is there presence of human speech? So what is speech? Is lost speech or not? Is there a speaker change? Is the speaker change occur at the end of a linguistic sentence? Is there some music when it starts, when it ends? Is there a new channel? Is there, for example, we move to telephone channel? And we have a lot of issues. For example, we can have two speakers at the same time, or we have the sentence that is remain unfinished because there are some differences. We can have music simultaneously with speech or noise with speech, and etc. So this task is quite difficult, in fact. So the first thing is speech activity detection. So the task is to identify the speech segments. So we have to be aware that speech here is mainly the linguistic content of speech. So if we have some breathing or loss, maybe you want to discard them. So the applications, we have a lot. There is speaker diarization, so speaker segmentation and recognition, speech recognition, emotion recognition, and we can also have all the data preparation process. For example, if you want to have some to build some speech synthesis model, you want to align the text with the speech. So you need also to segmentate the data. So usually speech activity detection is a frame level classification problem. So you have the speech, you extract the frame, you have the male spectrogram, and then you give this frame to a classifier, and this classifier will say, okay, this frame is 1 or 0. There is speech or there is not. The evaluation is usually done with classical evaluation metrics, such as miss, error, F1 score. We can also use some segmentation rate, but it will be discussed in the next lecture. So we have the speech representation. We can use the energy, MFCC, or eventually perceptive linear predictive coding, derivatives. We said also that speech is mainly harmonic, so we can just apply energy-based method, because we know that speech is harmonic, so if we discard all the non-harmonic sound, maybe we will have only speech remaining. So if we do that, so here we have the example from the little pigs. We want to have this part as a silence, so we would like to discard it. So here there is a breathing. We want to discard it. And here we have the bell ringing, so we want to discard it also. We know that speech is harmonic, and the F0 is mainly around 100, 200. So the main energy is low frequency. So if we apply a threshold, that's what I've done just here, we can apply a threshold, and then we remove all the non-harmonic sounds. So this threshold have been done with a very simple heuristic. So we say that the energy in the male bands from 2 to 15 must be lower than 0.1, and then we have retrieve only the harmonic parts of the signal. Is it okay for you? Can we keep it? Or we have to do something more intelligent? What do we miss by doing that? Okay, you're in the back of the sleepy thing. So here we have missed a lot of things, because all the speech sounds that are not harmonic, we discard them. So we don't want to discard this kind of sounds. For example, this green information here, you have spectral energy in the high frequencies, but it is not noise, it's speech. So these green events have been discarded by the threshold. So we don't want that it is discarded, because it is speech sound. The breathing information has been discarded also. So this is a question, do we want to discard it or not? Do we want to keep it or not? So probably you don't want, if you do some speech transcription, you don't want to keep it. And the music noise, of course, you want to remove it. So here we managed to remove it. So probably we have to build something that is more intelligent. So in the 2006, we have an initiative. So it is mainly driven by challenges, international challenges. But the first models for speech activity detection was based on GMMs, so Gaussian mixture models, and MFCCs and NRG. So, for example, the task was to retrieve the different classes: speech, noisy speech, speech over music, pure music, silence, or noise. And we build a GMM model for each of these classes with MFCCs and first and second derivatives, and also energy. And the decision is local at the frame level. So we have the frame represented by 13 MFCCs plus their derivative. We put them in the GMM, and then we find that, yes, okay, it is this class or not this class. So if we have 1, it means that we are in the speech or noisy speech or speech over music class. If we have 0, then we are in the pure music, silence, or noise class. So this is a model that is quite accurate, and it works. Then we have some neural approach. from Ryant in 2013. Here the task was to distinguish speech, music, noise, and singing. So singing is not easy because it is almost speech, but with a constraint F0. So the idea here is to have a basic deep neural network with 3 layers. And the speech signal is represented by the frame. And this frame is concatenated by the 40 previous frames and 40 next frames. So it is a local decision, so the decision is made at the frame level, but contextualized, it meaning that we are taking into account the previous and next frames. And in fact, this aspect to include some context in the model is very important, and it is what we are doing now. So we have some sequence-to-sequence models, and the idea is to have some context in input. So we have the frame, but not only the frame, but all the sequence of frame. And we would like to retrieve a sequence, not only one single point, but the whole sequence will be predicted by the model. So one of the first models to be tested for this task is a LSTM recurrent model. So it's almost this one. And the inputs can be MFCCs, so it was the case in the Jelly model. But we can also use MEL filter banks, of course. We can also use some pre-trained embeddings. So we talked a lot about that for text processing, but of course we can use them for audio processing also. And we can also plug a syncnet that will be trained within the system. So here, the representation is not derived from a spectrogram, but is derived from trainable filters, such as syncnet. So it is what is implemented in Pianote, and what we are going to try this afternoon. I wanted to go back. Now we have designed the models. I wanted to go back to what we have in the speech in order to say, okay, no, our model is correct or not. So we have to evaluate it, but what is the evaluation of the model in comparison to what a human can do? So how is it difficult to segmentate, to annotate the speech signal? For example, here we have a signal with a breathing, then a silence, and then the speech sound. So we have different phonemes. The breathing is lasts almost 200 milliseconds, and the silence 150. So it's quite long. And the annotator will put a boundary here, because it is the start of the speech. So he can put the boundary just here, because he is very precise, but it can be also a bit bored by his task or tired, so he will put the boundary mainly here. So there is a confidence that is not close to 0 when you do the annotation. So I think you are doing some annotation in the tutorial also this afternoon. We know that, for example, phonetic boundaries for phonetic transcription, phoneticians are very accurate, so they are able to have similar boundaries at almost 20 milliseconds. But for this kind of approach, it can be more than that. The question is that we don't annotate the same way. All the annotator will not annotate the same way. For example, the question of where the consonant starts when it is a plosive, we have a silence before. Do we consider this silence as silence or as speech? Because we need this silence to interpret the plosive. Also, the breathing and the loss, usually they are not taken into account, but it depends on the data. So we have seen that some breathing are considered as speech information. So that's why in some challenges they have introduced a color in the evaluation. So in 2009 they have introduced a color of 250 seconds, both before and after the boundary, and they do not evaluate anything in this area. So it is less difficult with this approach, but so far it model a little bit human annotation. So I talked about speech activity detection. Now we are moving to overlap speech detection, so when two speakers at least are talking together. The applications are, of course, the same as the previous ones. And it is still a frame-level classification problem. So we can use exactly the same approaches that I've talked about for speech activity detection, and the evaluation is still the same. So in this example, so we have to find the overlapping speech. According to you, how many segments of overlap we have? I can play the sound again.
Moi, Ah, j'avoue que ça fait penser un peu, tu sais, au confessionnal et tout.
So how many overlap speech segments is there? Who says 2? Who say 3? All right. So if you say 3, it means that you consider the loss as speech. All right. I prefer that. But I'm sure that people are doing speech transcription, they don't like that. So the task will be to find the blue segments from the audio signals. So we are going to consider only what has been annotated, so the blue ones. And we have to find them. So thank you, Martin, for all your tables. The question is, how many overlap is there in speech data? So we have conducted a study just to analyze the proportion of overlapping speech in the data we have. So the first blue and yellow data are French broadcast news, and then we have Dayard and AMI. We can see here the overlap proportion that have been calculated on this data, so in duration. We can see that there are some that have very low proportion of overlap. Some data have reasonable proportion, and some have higher than 10%. We can separate this in 3 groups. So the first blue group corresponds to broadcast news. In fact, it can be audiobooks also. Broadcast news, there is experts or newscasters, columnists, and there is no interaction between them and the other people talking at the radio or TV. There are very few overlapping speech, and the segments of overlapping speech are quite short. They are less than 1 second. That's what we can see in this blue distribution here. So we have the segment duration in second, and here it is the quantity, the amount. If you look to the yellow database, we have broadcast news with debates and interviews. So of course you are more likely to have overlapping speech. We are going up to 10% according to shows, and segments of overlap are between 1 and 2 seconds, so they are longer. In AMI and Dayard, we have some conversational speech and spontaneous speech, so the overlap proportion is more than 10%, and the segments are quite long. Sometimes they are very long, but this is an error of annotation. We have saw that also. So according to the data you are dealing with, the proportion of overlap is very different, but so far it is around 10%, so it's not so much. And if you want to build a correct model, you have to balance your data. Then we will have to artificially augment the amount of overlapping data. So this is one of the models that is implemented that we have implemented. So it is the same architecture as before for the speech activity detection. The network can be a recurrent network LSTM or temporal convolutional neural network. We can have different acoustic inputs. Here we can have MFCCs, of course, mail banks also, but also pre-trained embeddings, Wave2Vec or WaveLM, or trainable SIGNet with, for example, 5 second in input. That is what is implemented in Pianot. And then we have to augment artificially the data. So there is a very simple thing to do. It is to take one segment from one show, and then we sum with the segment of another show. We don't know if there is some overlapping speech here. We don't know if there is some overlapping speech here. And we sum both, and eventually we will have some overlapping speech. So by doing that, we ensure to have more frequent overlap speech than in the original database. So we are doing some audio summation for in order to have 50% of the training dataset that have some overlapping speech. And we also do some data augmentation with noise, as classically done in the neural training. So if we move to the results, I didn't present the results on speech activity detection because there is not a real standard for there is not real baseline for this task. But it is around 90% or 97%. But for overlapping speech detection, of course, it is a harder task. Here we can see different results with MFCCs and recurrent network, or WaveLM and recurrent network, and also the temporal convolutional network. So we can see that, of course, the WaveLM input helps to have better performance than the MFCCs. We can also see that the temporal convolutional network that has less parameters than the recurrent network can achieve better results. So we have here 63.4% on the DIA3 test set. And the advantage of this temporal convolutional network, so it reduces the number of parameters. There are causal convolutions, so it doesn't take any information from the future, where the recurrent bidirectional takes information from the future. And then we can mix both approaches, so speech activity detection and overlap speech detection. So we saw previously that there were some tasks to identify 5 classes, so speech with music, speech with noise, speech alone, and etc. So here the idea is almost the same. We are going to have 3 classes. So the classes are no speech, speech, and overlap speech. So it is mainly the number of speakers, because no speech we have no speaker, speech we have only 1, and then we have more than 2 plus. So it's mainly a task of counting the number of active speakers. And we can evaluate the model on overlap detection, so to be comparable to the previous table. But we can evaluate it on speech activity detection also. So we take advantage of the 2 approaches. So in for overlap detection, with the 2-class approach, we have 66% on die-hard, on F1 score. If we have the 3-class approach, we have 66.8, so it's not a good improvement. But if we look to both to the 3 databases, Diode Allies and AMI, we can see that we improve a little bit the detection. And the baseline is the paper from Cornell 2020. So this is one option. Sorry. And the last option I will just open in perspectives is to predict really the 2 levels jointly, so the speech activity and the overlapping speech. So we don't predict one class among 3, but the 2 classes in the same time. Just a small reminder that usually we are using a softmax, then Rmax to select the correct class when you have binary classification. So if we put the threshold, so the output of the softmax is the blue line. So the threshold of the Rmax will be the dotted yellow line. Of course, here, what is over 0.5 will be considered as the good class, so speech or overlap, depends of the task. And what is under the threshold will be considered as the 0 class. We can have some more accurate post-processing by selecting 2 thresholds, one for up and one for down as a hysteresis process. So here we can see that the up is starting just here. So we will detect only the second segment, but this first segment will be considered as non-speech. So these parameters, these thresholds, should be tuned on the development set, but it can help to improve a little bit the results. Regarding back to human evaluation, so I've done that for speech activity detection, but we can do also for overlapping speech. When the system is doing some errors, usually it is because there is the presence of music or background noise. This background noise can be human noise as brouhaha, for example, but also cars in the street or so on. And we have also prediction errors coming from inconsistency of human annotations. So for that, we cannot do anything except going back to the data and annotate again. So an example here is the question of the translation. So I can let you hear.
La ville connaîtra l'organisation de la plus grande course de dromadaires à l'échelle mondiale.
So we have the interviewee talking in Arabic language, and then we have the journalist that is translating what she's saying. So in the first version of the database, we had the transcription was concerning only the main speaker, so the journalist. But so far, if we develop an overlap speech detection system, probably if there is 2 people talking together, even if they are not talking in the same language, they will detect some overlapping speech. So we need to correct this information and to say, okay, there is 2 speakers, in fact. One is in the background talking in Arabic language, and one is in the foreground and talking in French, but so far they are talking together. So we have to correct everything. And in the data we had, this translation were not considered as overlap at all. So we have a lot of troubles with the consistency of data. Also, we have another issue, because when you have 2 speakers talking together, at what level of intensity you consider that the second speaker is active or not? If he's talking too loud, quite loud, you can consider that he is active and there is overlap. But if he is talking very quietly, maybe he's not active. But maybe it depends of the ear of the annotator. So for that, we will have still an inconsistency, and we will need to manage with that. So a short slide for perspectives and application. Why did I talk a lot about voice acoustics? So to me, it's very important to have some knowledge of how we produce the sound of speech in order to better know what is inside the data. Doing speech acoustics is quite great, and you can better choose your model parameters, and it can help in interpreting the predictions. So there is a tendency that regarding interpretability and explainability. And in speech, most of the applications are going back to the spectrogram. This is an example in 2021. So we have here the spectrogram, and they extracted some Shapley value from the spectrogram. So it was for spoofing, anti-spoofing. And so there is some values in red and in blue. But if you don't know how to interpret the spectrogram, of course, you cannot say anything of this information. You just see that there are some red and blue lines that are probably alternative, but it's very difficult to interpret these kind of things. So at least if you know that there is a harmonic signal and so on, maybe you can interpret more easily, but not sure. Another perspective is to generalize the audio segmentation. So I have seen that when we join the two classes, pitch and overlap, we can gain in performances. So maybe if we predict jointly the music, noise, and speech levels in the same model, we can improve also the performances. We can also add confidence measures in order to balance, in fact, the decision of the model. For example, if it predicts that there is pitch, but there is a lot of noise, maybe it will explain that maybe the confidence will be low. And audio segmentation can also be viewed as a proxy to explain some application decision. So during the workshop, we are going to work on speaker diarization. So the application will be speaker diarization. And we can explain the speaker diarization outputs with the output of the audio segmentation. So I am done with that. Thank you. I think we have 10 minutes for questions or for coffee, up to you.
Just a little remark. Please do not share the opinion that 8 kHz signal is enough with providers, because I've been working in the field for quite a while, and it's really difficult to persuade companies that we need to move to 16 kHz. For various reasons. One of the reasons that I do not like signal on 8 kHz is you do not have the control on how the signal is compressed. And very often what you get in the signal is shadows of higher frequencies that get back to 8 kHz range, which completely destroys the signal for you if there is something very loud. So that is one thing. And the second thing, have you tried in your experiments to actually vary your signals just by simple scaling? Because all of our experiments with VAD very often showed big issues based just on the amplitude. So if you shift the amplitude, just multiply your signal, you get completely different results.
No, we didn't try that. The only thing I can say is that when we do the noise augmentation, we perturb the model and we force the model to do not rely only on this information of the level. But I don't have any precise
I would make a suggestion
experiments.
really to evaluate and shuffle your data set with just scaling. Yeah. And you will be very surprised for the results. Very often, I do not know about the DNN, we didn't use the DNN, but most of the VADs based on GMM are actually quite fixed on which energy threshold is used, and that threshold does not evolve with the signal very often. The DNN may not be that prone to that, but still I would definitely try that.
Yeah, that's a good idea, yeah.
Awesome.
I didn't talk about any codecs on the compression information, but we have some issue also with that kind of things.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible, especially if you are dealing with telephony signals where you have really very different devices that are performing the recording, because it goes through an edge of your telephony provider. And that can create a real havoc in the signal.
Yeah, we are dealing with data from archivists, and when they compress the information, they use some codecs, but the codecs are not the same during the time. So
yeah, that's the thing.
I'm not familiar with MIS and ER evaluation, so can you explain it, please?
So the ER, I don't know if it is a standard way of presenting it, but MIS is that you miss the frame, so you detect you detect 0 while it is 1, so it is a miss frame. And the false alarm is the opposite way. So you detect a 0 where it is a 1. No, you detect a 1 where it is a 0. Yeah. So miss is the model missed the frame, and false alarm. So it predicts speech where it is not.
Yeah. So it's like accuracy.
In fact, it is more informative than accuracy, because you have these two approach, but when you compute then the segmentation error rate, you will mix the two information.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.